Adam Coleman, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thank you for having me.
Excited that you're here. You have been writing for our Substack for the better part of a year now, and you have a new book, The Children We Left Behind. So let's start here. Who are the children we've left behind?
Well, I was one of them, especially in my circumstance growing up without my father, and discussing how it impacted me, especially throughout the book, telling different stories, pivotal moments where family separation really traumatized me as a child. But as far as who are those children, many children throughout America, and honestly, I would say throughout the West. The United Kingdom is just behind the United States as far as the rate of children who grow up in a separate home from one of their parents. So I believe the United States is around 23%, according to Pew Research, and the United Kingdom is like 21%. And so it crosses racial lines, it crosses all different types of demographics. And at the end of the day, we have a slew of children who aren't being advocated for. And what happens to them? Obviously, they become adults one day. So what happens to the byproduct of family separation? Well, in the extreme cases, it turns into drug addiction, violent criminality, all these different things that we complain about. Why won't these politicians fix this and that? When really, these people are just the byproduct of how they were raised and what they experience. Even with something like homelessness and, places like San Francisco, high amount of people who are homeless on the streets. But if you look, it's not a homeless issue, it's a drug addiction issue.
Yeah.
And most of the people I've ever seen who take hard drugs, especially for an extended period of time, have been taking it for a long time. They've been taking it since they were teenagers. And you think to yourself, well, why would a teenager need to take hard drugs? And it's because they're trying to cope with something. Well, what are they trying to cope with? In many of cases, physical abuse, complete abandonment. I wouldn't be shocked if there are a number of them who are coming from the foster care system, just completely forgotten by both parents, whether their parents are drug addicts and led for them to be pushed into the system. So we're just seeing in many ways the things that we're complaining about, there's a root cause for it. And we're often looking at the superficial. If we just pump in enough money and give them a house, everything will be fixed. And it's
Right.
like, no, it's far more deep and detailed. And it takes a lot more effort than just splash some cash, which is why it hasn't worked.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show. One of the things that runs through the book and through some of your, public engagement on X and elsewhere is that, and you're touching on it by pointing to the UK, but that there is a Western cultural phenomenon that's going on here. That's not merely, say, civil rights issues in America or the welfare state per se. Because I think a lot of this you can look to the transformation of the incentives
Right.
after the Great Society and how that broke. That's a break point in America, but it's broader than that because that's not the same story as the UK, and yet they're not far behind. So that suggests there's something else going on. So how do you understand the factors going into this that are broader, that are cultural?
So I think, I think this entire thing is complicated. So the areas I would focus on is increased prosperity, increasing individualism. And so that prosperity makes life easier. And then with their life being easier gives them more freedom, right? And so what do you do with that freedom? Well, you think about yourself because the question is, what do you do with your freedom? And so it becomes about what you want. What are your choices, right? And now you have various industries. It's not just manual labor. It's white collar jobs. It's all different types of work. It's careers, right? Now we have this idea of a career.
Yeah.
So now, well, you're choosing all of these things, and it ultimately becomes up to what do you want? What's your destiny? And these aren't necessarily bad things on its own. The problem is that when it goes too far, when it's about what you want constantly, and being a parent is not always about what you want. It's about what's for the benefit of the child, what's feasible to actually go towards that also benefits your child. And so I do think that we're at a cross between, and it's not just, this isn't something new. I think this has been going on for at least 2-3 generations.
Yeah.
Of people who've been choosing themselves consistently and rationalizing all of their choices despite how it may affect their kids. So, for example, if there's a household where there's infidelity, well, clearly one partner is not thinking about their kids as they're sleeping with another man or woman, right? They're thinking about themselves and how they feel and wanting to feel loved and accepted somewhere else. And yet they know deep down that what's about to happen, a divorce is coming, it's going to be tumultuous, the kids are going to get split apart, there's going to be infighting, it's likely not going to be easy. Yet they made this choice. So why are they constantly choosing themselves over their kids? And it's because, well, the kids have not become a priority, or at least not a top priority. They become secondary to what they want. And so that's the kind of attitude that I see often comes up. The adults are making excuses. They're rationalizing everything that they want to do so they can do the thing they want to do. And so they say stuff like, well, if I'm happy, my kids will be happy. And that's not how kids operate, right? You have to make choices that also benefit your kids. Instead of making excuses, saying, well, I'll get a divorce and I'll just put the kids into therapy and they'll be fine. And that's not the case. Divorce, I'm not one of those people who says no one should ever get divorced. There are obviously reasons why people should split apart. They'll be far more detrimental if they stay together. But I've never met a person who said that, well, I didn't need to get a divorce. Everyone thinks they need to get a divorce who gets a divorce. Yeah. Everyone thinks that their circumstance is special. So my question is, was it a lack in communication? Was it pride? Was it all of these other things that was absent of your children? And I do think that this is far often the case. Infidelity is another example. Clearly, you're not thinking about your kids. Why aren't you trying to work things out with their mother, their father? So it is a culture of selfishness that I'm criticizing. It's a constant need to put themselves as the parents above their kids and to drag the kids along. Because I think as adults, we forget, like, children don't have full rights like us. They can't get in a car and drive away from their dysfunctional parents. They're stuck, right? And outside of extreme cases of abuse where the state can get involved and take the kids away, everything else is permissible. So you're allowed to stay with a parent who makes terrible decisions all the time. As long as you're not starving and getting beaten or abused, you'll stay there. So children get dragged along this routine of their parents choosing themselves, choosing someone else, mother choosing her boyfriend, all these other choices that they get to make. And the kids are stuck.
One of the things that inspired this channel, that this channel actually began in 2019 as a documentary whose working title was The Kids Are Not All Right. And the basic premise, and it was something that came out of my own experience of observing my son's peers mostly, not so much him, but his peers. And then reading about the broader components going in to the dysfunction and the anxiety and the psychological breakdown in Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's book, The Coddling of the American Mind. It told a story. And that story was, we've overprotected our kids. We've actually poured too much attention into them in a certain sense and prevented them from having the kinds of experiences that make you resilient and anti-fragile. And so they get into middle school, high school, and they're nervous wrecks. And then they become prey to radical whack job ideology like wokeism, where suddenly everything's victimhood and identity politics. And I want to get to that because that, your prior book, you touched on this in a big way.
Yeah.
But that's this one lane that felt like it was mostly about essentially a kind of privileged kids that have both parents that are maybe having a smaller family and putting all their attention in helicoptering. And that says, and this was something that I found just so absent. It was the fatherhood story, the lack of dad in the picture wasn't part of that at all.
Right.
And then you have this entire other track that your book is about and that you're talking about, which is a neglect, sometimes outright abuse, but certainly the neglect, those who don't have the stable family, don't have mom and dad together there. How do you think about those two forces? Because do they overlap in some ways? Like, how do you think about, because they're like two different things that are basically smashing our kids in different ways.
Well, it's out of balance. Both are out of balance. So overprotecting kids often is because of the parent having anxiety, right? And it's not, oh, well, I'm overprotecting for the benefit of my child. It's, I'm overprotecting because I would feel a particular way if I don't, right? Once again, being about the adult. Whereas in a normal, healthy circumstance, you would allow your child to mess up, right? Obviously, you don't want them to get severely hurt, but it's okay if they hurt themselves, right? You have to put them in a position where they have to experience the world in an age-appropriate way. Let them make mistakes. Let them figure it out. When they have their first boyfriend or girlfriend, let them see that this isn't going to last forever. Like, don't fight it. I did that with my son. He's, oh, I have a little girlfriend. Okay, sure. And then when he got disappointed, then we had the conversation, right? Welcome to the world. This is what it is.
Heartbreak is a thing.
Heartbreak is a thing.
It mends, it heals.
Exactly. So for me, as a parent, everything is about introducing my son to the world in an age-appropriate way, just like bits and pieces as far as what he can handle. So overprotecting them, having them avoid all of that stuff, leaves them as basically almost disabled adults. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to do anything. And I've met kids like that, where they go to college, they don't know how to wash their own clothes. Like, I never had to use a washer. It was like, how is that possible? Because I was like a child maid at home. I had to do everything. I had to, scrub everything. So, that's obviously one point where they had the privilege to have maybe an in-home, stay-at-home mother who can do everything, right? And the father provides enough where she doesn't have to work. Like, that's a certain level of economic privilege. On the other hand, what I'm talking about is the family separation component, where it could be of a married couple, but they're choosing to separate for a variety of reasons, right? And often those reasons aren't that great of reasons, especially if the reason why they're separating puts themselves over the children. And I believe like the top reason most people get divorced is because of finances. Well, if you think about it, getting divorced doesn't improve your finances.
No, it's like, I got financial trouble. Let me blow up a nuclear warhead of financial catastrophe in my life and see how that improves the situation.
Exactly. So that's obviously not the solution, but the adults are choosing that because ultimately they don't want to be with each other anymore. They don't want to resolve it. They don't want to give it time. There's no patience. Maybe one partner is more in than the other for whatever reason. And obviously you can't force your partner to stay with you, right? Both of them have to be all in, which is why family planning is incredibly important. Who you choose is important, right? But yes, you're absolutely right. The Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt are talking about a more privileged household that can almost like afford to helicopter. They're constantly around. I'm talking about, in many ways, the kids who are not as privileged, who did grow up in a single parent home like I did. We experienced homelessness. We had to move a lot. We had to get support from all different types of people. Meanwhile, my father is somewhere else doing his own thing.
So, what exactly happened? Tell me, give me your story. Like, where did you have any relationship with your biological father at all? How did it all happen?
So I was born in Detroit. I lived there, I want to say until I was about 6 years old. My father was always married. He was just married to somebody else. So we were like the other kids.
So does that, so your mom got pregnant while he was married to someone else?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. He would occasionally come over. I was very young, so I have seldom memory of my father being around at that age. But based off of my mother, just telling me how everything went, he would once in a while come over. He would once in a while help with certain things. But my relationship with him wasn't very solid. Like, it got to a point where he would pay for me to come over to him. Like, he'd give me money so I'd come over to him. And my mom and even he couldn't figure out, I was like, what's wrong with this boy? He doesn't want to come over to me. But obviously, like, we don't have a relationship. You
Right.
pop in once in a while.
There's no bond.
There's no bond there. Um, and ultimately, Detroit was getting more dangerous. I was talking to my mom and my sister about this last year. She was like, "You don't remember there was drug dealers coming around and stuff like that?" Like, it was visibly getting worse.
Where in Detroit? My wife is from Detroit, so I've spent some time there.
I wish I
Do
remembered.
you remember which mile street?
No, I don't even remember.
Yeah, because it's like the further you get from downtown, like 8 Mile from the rap song, Not So Hot.
Yeah.
By 14 Mile, it's a nice neighborhood.
It was definitely the hood.
Yeah.
But my mom ended up selling the house. We moved to Virginia. We stayed with some family members for a little bit, and we got our own place. There ended up being a house fire. My sister, she actually saw scars on her hand from the house fire. I was fine. We left after about a year of being in Virginia. We moved to upstate New York. My mom wanted to go back to school, and we stayed with another family member, but that quickly didn't work out. My sister remembers one night my mom was at work, and I was going to the kitchen, and my family member came out and screamed at me, and it scared me so much that I peed myself. And I believe it was that incident when my sister told my mom. So then the following day, I got off the school bus, and I remember my mom was like, "We're leaving." Like, we had no place to go, but she knew that she wasn't having her boy there.
Yeah.
So we proceeded to stay in hotel rooms for a little bit. I believe my mom was looking for some sort of support and ran across this lady who had a trailer. She had a room in a trailer available. So all three of us stayed in that room in her trailer, I think for about like a month or so. And then we finally got enough money to get an apartment. And so you would think like, all right, there's some stability. But at that point, I remember some of it,
Yeah.
and other parts of it is from my family telling me. I started having a mental breakdown. My sister remembers me being underneath the kitchen table in a fetal position, screaming. My mother told me that I said to her that if she loved me, she'd help me die. And I was 8 years old at that point. I do remember driving somewhere, no one telling me where we were going, making it into this building, walking into the building, not understanding where I was, and my mother handed me off to people, and she left. And I didn't know where I was. I was being admitted into a mental hospital. And the best way I explain to people about going to a mental hospital is that, when you go to jail, you know how long you're going to be there for. When you go to a mental hospital, it's up to them. So every day you're kind of guessing, is today going to be the day? And when you're a child going through this, you have no idea. Like, all of this is, you just want to go home. And the only thing I knew was to, one, survive, and two, to just do whatever they tell me to do. That was it. And my mom would come and visit me. And every time she would come and visit, I would think like, today's the day I get to go home. And she would have to tell me no. And a lot of these memories I blocked out for a long time because they were painful to think about. And my sister, this is almost like 10 years ago, my sister brought it up, like, "You don't remember that?" And it was like a flood of emotions came back, and this started like weeping and crying on the phone with my sister. But she told me my mother's perspective, because I never thought about like what was my mother going through while I was locked away. I always thought about me. And she said every day, every time she would go to see you and she'd have to leave you there, she'd cry the entire drive home. And I was like, man, I never thought about like what my mother went through.
Yeah. You just think, my mom, why did you leave me here? You're mean. You're terrible.
Actually,
or how did you feel? Do you remember how you felt when this would happen? Can you put yourself back there?
Yeah, I knew why I was there. Once I realized where I was, I knew why I was there. But I wasn't, and even to this day, I was never angry at my mother. I would later learn like this is what the professionals advised her to do, and I've had some mental health professionals say like they should have never done that. Like they're just re-traumatizing you.
Yeah.
You're clearly having abandonment issues, and then they're telling you to abandon you inside this facility. Um, but I was never angry at my mother. And to this day, I understood why she did that. But at the same time, that event changed me. And even my mother said, like, after that, I was different. I became quieter. I kept to myself, expressionless, like on my face. It's hard to tell if I'm happy or not. Um, and for the vast majority of my life, I was like that.
You put up walls.
Yeah. Yeah. I put up emotional walls so people didn't know how I was feeling. So, especially with writing this, my mother got to read it and like for the first time know like what I was struggling with, not just as a kid, but into my early adult years, still struggling with suicidal ideation in my 20s. And she didn't know this.
My wife and I have explored adoption, and as part of that process, we've had to take a lot of classes, approaching 40 hours of classes on bonding and attachment and what happens when there isn't attachment.
Yeah.
And that's so much of what you're talking about feels like that's at the heart of it. It's like we want to be attached. We want to know that there's a connection there.
Yeah.
And that, both mom and dad right from the beginning. And when that's not there, it's just fundamentally destabilizing. It's just, and in ways that we don't understand at the time. Like you're 8 years old. Like you obviously you see other kids that have a life that looks better than your life. Right.
Right.
But where do you go from there? It's like, well, why isn't this for me? Like, why didn't I get what they have? I mean,
Well,
how do you think about that experience for both for yourself and for other kids who are like in that circumstance where everybody's got screens, they can see happy families or what looks like a happy family. Like, what was the story you were telling yourself about what was going on?
it was my fault. Something's wrong with me. You start questioning if you deserve love. And then times I resented my father. I was angry at him. But like you said, like I was in Boy Scouts, clearly on the cover, I was in Boy Scouts from Cub Scouts all the way to Boy Scouts. And it's a father-son type of organization. And I'm the only one who doesn't have his father there. My mother would drop me off and and obviously like there are good people who are there, but I'm not their primary focus and I'm not really supposed to be. It's their son. It's a bonding moment. Mm-hmm. Same thing when I was playing Little League Baseball. The fathers were either in the stands or on the team, coaching. And I didn't have anyone advocating for me. I was always like last in the lineup, always stuck me in the outfield. By the time I finished playing baseball, I was kind of finished with baseball, because
I understand baseball.
Yeah.
Baseball is a lot. I did Little League Baseball. I hated it. It was like I'm standing out here waiting for a painful projectile to maybe come hurling at my face. Otherwise, it's just boring.
Yeah.
It's just boring. It's like long stretches of boredom with very acute moments of terror. That was my baseball experience.
Well, especially because like you want to be in the infield where the action is. Like the little kids can't hit, but they can at least hit it to second base or something like that. But I noticed that the kids who had the coaches on the team or they were connected to whoever, they got the best positions, even if they sucked at it, right? I remember one particular game, the head coach, his son was pitching, and he was purposefully throwing balls. And he was like, "Are you going to take me out?" He was like, "Keep him in there." And I'm like, what the hell, man? I would love to go in. Like, I really wanted to be a pitcher. But not having like a father there to advocate for me or giving me a chance, everyone is there, focusing on their kid and what their kids are doing. And always looking in the stands. My father was never there. I don't even think he knew I played baseball, to be honest with you.
And at this point now, you guys are living a distance from because your dad was still in the Detroit area, right?
Yeah, he was always in Detroit.
So once you moved out of Detroit, you were a flight away from your biological dad.
Correct. But I also didn't really hear from him.
Yeah.
I would hear maybe like once or twice a year. And even then it wasn't phone calls for me. It's like, I want to speak to my kids. It was almost like he was talking to my mom and my mom was like, "You want to talk to your kids," kind of thing. Or I think my sister reached out to my father. My sister's 4 years older than me. So she might have reached out to him, but she would force more of a relationship with him. But I wasn't like that. Like, I wasn't going to force anything with my father. And honestly, it's not the child's responsibility to establish a relationship with the parent. Um, but I wouldn't really hear from him. And when he did come through, I would initially be sort of excited to see him. Um, my father's from Trinidad, and he just had like a little bit of a island swagger to him. Um, and he was a handsome, like when I was born, he was 50. So he was already older in age in comparison to my mother. My mother was 24. Um, so, when I would see him, he's getting a little bit older, but he doesn't look that old. Like, that was the thing I always took. Like, he's in his 60s, but he doesn't even look like he's in his 60s. Like, he has a little bit of gray.
Sounds like my father-in-law. He's
Yeah.
pushing 90 and he looks like he's in his 60s. So.
Yeah.
Something in that Detroit water. Some of the pollution might be like positive mutation stuff going on.
Yeah. Or he liked to drink Mickey's beer. Maybe that was in the Mickey's beer. But I would see him and initially be excited, but like, I never got his attention. Like, he was there mainly because we were living in the Northeast, either in upstate New York or New Jersey. But he was mainly coming through to go to New York City to get fabric because he was a tailor. And so he stayed with us, kind of like this was a place that he could stay on his round there. So it was really out of convenience that he was coming through. It wasn't, hey, I miss my kids, we're going to go do X, Y, Z. It wasn't anything like that. So the older I got, the less I was excited to see my father because it kind of felt like nonsense. Like, he wasn't really there to see me.
One of the things that is so hard with these circumstances is like, where do you find it in yourself to not repeat the cycle? So talk to me about that, because you're here because you're breaking that for yourself and for your future.
Yeah.
What made that possible for you? Like, how did you not end up going down a similar road? Because that does seem to be a big part of what's going on in communities, is the family breaks apart and then the brokenness just becomes a kind of rinse and repeat cycle.
Yeah. I would say that, and this actually kind of goes back to the book. The whole point of the book is to make people remember what it's like to be a kid, right? And a lot of my decisions were about remembering when I was a kid. So when my son was born and holding him for the first time, I knew I didn't want to be my father, And so that was something that was always at the forefront of my mind. Like, my father put in zero effort. I'm going to put in the most effort I can possibly do. I'm going to do the opposite of my father.
Yeah.
Now, how to be a father is a different story. Like, most kids that grow up with their father and they have a demonstration. He's the person they can mimic. But I didn't have that. So I kind of had to work from scratch. I thought about what kind of father would I have wanted when I was a kid. And so that's basically what I was trying to do. I was trying to become the father that I would have wanted as a kid. And I think I achieved that with my son. Obviously, like in the beginning, you make some mistakes, you take some risks, but my son never felt like his father didn't love him. I was always available with him. And so I just remembered as a kid, for one, I hated getting spankings. Right.
It's completely verboten now. How dare you if you
Oh, trust me, it happens.
I got spanked too. I know corporal punishment is controversial, but there are times where it is not a completely irresponsible thing to do.
Yeah.
If your kids are putting themselves in physical danger and they're too little to know to be rationalized with because they're just little animals, sometimes you have to let them feel what's going on. That's my take. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I always thought about, if you're yelling at me, I already feel terrible, right? Because the person I'm here to please, my mother, right? She's the adult figure. Like, I disappointed her. And I think that's how most kids feel.
Yeah.
Like, you're screaming at them. They know they messed up. It's just unnecessary to put your hands on me.
Yes.
So when it came to disciplining him, I initially started doing like what my mother did, right? And this isn't shade at my mother or anything like that. I don't think she's a terrible person or anything. But I would pop him. But I hated it. I didn't like how it felt doing it. Because how am I supposed to show him that I love him, but every time he makes a small mistake, I pop him on the butt? And so I just said, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so I just stopped. I didn't tell him. He doesn't know, like, oh, he's not going to hit me or anything like that. But I just stopped doing it. And every time he messed up, I would talk to him more and I would communicate. And if I had to raise my voice, I raised my voice. But I explained to him, I taught him why you're not allowed to do that. I would tell him no all the time. So much so that he didn't fight it because I tell him no. And he
Yeah.
understands you can't get things that you want all the time. And actually, I did something where I set up disappointment for him by telling him no, because he would play like these video games and he would lose the game. And I would see him like get really upset that he lost the game when he was very young. And I was like, that's not good, because he like expects to win and he gets really pissed off. So then I just started setting up opportunities to tell him no. Can I have a cookie? Sure, he could have a cookie. He didn't do anything wrong, but I would tell him no, and he would pout a little bit. But then he'd move on. And then for every time I would tell him no after that, it was less and less, to the point where it was like, okay. And he would just move on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, get little disappointment to become, have a certain amount of comfort with it.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world.
You're going to be okay. You're going to survive a little disappointment.
Exactly. So whereas as he got older and the disappointments in life get bigger, he's taking it with stride. And I see that, he's had different things. He's had to move. He's had to go to different schools. He's had to deal with different things. And he's handling it better than I did when I was a kid, because he had someone, one, that he could always lean on and talk to, me. And he understood that life is unpredictable and you can't always get the things that you want.
How old is your son now?
19.
Yeah. Oh, we have the same age boy.
Yeah.
It's this is an interesting moment as a father, because on one level they're like a legal adult at 19, but at another level, especially I think for boys and girls they both have their own different things going on at this age, but
right.
The current way this gets talked about is that executive function isn't sort of fully there until they're like 25, 26.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of feel it. I certainly feel with my son, like he's maturing, but he hasn't matured. But it's different. Like I'm at that frontier of we both are at, like, okay, well now he's not a kid. So what am I doing now? Like, what's my job now as a father? How do you think about that?
I see myself almost like a mentor. I think that's kind of like, yes, I'm his father, but you have to kind of take a step back. You can't tell him what to do, right? And nor should you. Leading up to him being, 17, 18, I'm not really telling him what to do 24/7. I'm letting him experience life and occasionally using my authority. But now that he's 19, it's about mentoring him to becoming a happy and healthy adult. He's like, I want to do this. Should I do that? Being available so you can have some like good advice from someone who's experienced, right? It's kind of like a mentor position. You can call me anytime and we could talk about whatever, whether it's about his career choice, whether it's about relationship, whatever. He knows that he can reach out to me and we'll always discuss it. He also knows, like, I don't expect to see him every day or every week or anything like that. But he knows that he can always come by and he can always come and see me. He lives with his mother primarily now, and they're a little bit distant. They had just recently moved. But I'm like, when you come and see your father, that kind of thing. But he's living his life, and I really am. If he doesn't come and see me, it's absolutely fine. As long as he's happy and healthy and he's living his life, when we figure out time that works for both of us. But I'm actually happy, when he was 17, 16, he started driving. He started going to see his friends. He would be like, Dad, I know I normally come and see you, but like, it's okay. I'm like, go spend time with your friends. Because those things are really important for his development, to gain confidence, to build like a friendship circle. You can hang out with me anytime. Like, you've been doing that your entire life. Go spend time with your friends. It's perfectly fine. So I've never told him no if something interfered with the normal time that we spend time together. But I always try to make sure, like, I'm mentoring him. Like, did you follow through on the thing that you said you're going to do? But I will say this, the most important thing that I'm like super, super proud of my son is his work ethic. Because when he was a
Yeah.
teenager, there was a point, and obviously it was during the pandemic, so it was very difficult. So I try to give him some grace. But I've explicitly told him, you cannot turn off and turn on hard work. You got to do it. You have to do it repeatedly. And I think he started taking that to heart. So when he recently moved and he got a job at a restaurant, we went there for his 19th birthday, and his coworkers were, singing happy birthday to him, and we had a cake for him. But he was still essentially working at the
Yeah.
time. And I'm watching him, and he is buzzing all around that place. He is buzzing. He's not complaining. He's like, whatever you want me to do. You want me to, wipe down the windows? You want me to, whatever you want me to do, I'm doing it. He was bussing tables. He was working hard, and he wasn't complaining whatsoever. And he was proud of the work that he was doing. And on top of that, everyone there liked and respected him.
Yeah, that's the best. There is this funny thing with our kids, which is for all the work, if we're doing a decent job that we put in to try to be there and do the thing that we're supposed to do as parents, we don't necessarily we only get glimpses of the fruits of that work usually when it's like in a different context, like when they go over someone's house. And then the parents are like, your son is so respectful, and
Yep.
he's the nicest boy. He's the only one that comes in and looks us in the eye and talks to us. And meanwhile, they actually behave worse with us than they do with other people. Has that been your experience too? It's like, you get to see your kid out there in the world, and that's when you really get to see the kind of man they're becoming.
You know what? My son is very consistent. So he's polite with us. Honestly, he never really gave me that much trouble growing up.
That's great.
But I don't think it's like the genetic lottery. I think it's mostly because we have open communication. We talk about things. Obviously, people use open communication. They tell the kids too much.
Yeah.
But I mean, like an appropriate way where he could feel like he can talk to me, and I'm not judging him constantly. So I'm like, I had a philosophy with him. I was like, if you mess up, just tell me so we can work through it. Don't lie to me. That was my number one rule. And the one time I was severely pissed at my son was because he lied to me and he didn't need to. And so, and I scolded him for a couple weeks straight, and he got the point, and he doesn't want to disappoint his father. So like I could hear his reaction, but he got the point. Don't lie to me. Like the lying part makes it far worse. Whatever you did, let's just talk about it. Right. And so I think having that, he's never felt like he has to be something else around me. Or at least I've tried to reinforce, like, be yourself. If you're a goofy kid, be a goofy kid, but be yourself around me. But also understand, like, I'm your father, not your friend. That's another line as well.
Yeah.
But we're friendly with each other. I love my son very, very, very much. So when he's around other people, he's consistent. Like same thing, other parents, like you can come over anytime. He's gone to me and said, I'm like, you want to hang out with such? He's like, no, I don't want to hang out with him. I'm like, why? Why not? He smokes weed. I'm like, oh, okay. So
it's a good boy.
Yeah. So he's very much so consistent, has a good head on his shoulders. And I've tried to make sure that I'm a good role model for him. Like, for example, I would listen to rap, never with him around. I listen to nothing but electronic music. If we're in the car, it's nothing. There's just music, no words. And I was like that basically for like the first 16 years. He never heard me curse. He never heard music with curse words because obviously he's around other people and they curse. But I just didn't want to model that for him where that's a normal thing that we should just be cursing left and right or playing degenerate music. And that's a good thing, right? If you're going to hear that someone else. But I'm your father and I'm here to represent something that is what you should achieve, the best possible outcome. And I'm here to demonstrate that for you. So I'm not going to play this stuff around you. And, so you think that, oh, this is a normal good thing that everybody should do. And actually because of that, I listened to it less and less because I was like, I don't really even need to listen to that. And then I really started hearing the words and I'm like, this is This
Yeah.
is nonsense. I don't need to consume this all the time. So yeah,
The let's zoom back out to the culture,
yeah,
because you know, you are a cultural critic as much as anything else. You are looking at the world and, you know, letting people have it. And so what do you see as the forces at work right now? You know, this is a very interesting moment we're in our like in America, in um politically, all of it. It's like it's strange. It's definitely the strangest time that I can remember.
yeah.
Um and there's been this ebb and flow of like masculinity,
Mhm.
so we've been through this like dark woke age in which masculinity is toxic, and um articles in magazines saying we don't even need fathers, like men aren't good for anything. And that seems to be waning. It seems like between Trump and the assassination and all the stuff of the past 12 months,
Mhm.
um that era, that victimhood era, which speaks to your prior book, uh, is maybe in retreat. How do you think about that? How do you think about what's going on as a man, as somebody that wants to like promote healthy masculinity and fatherhood?
Well, I think all of those things that you mentioned, I think the underpinning to all of it is actually propaganda, right? So if we talk about like the transgender stuff, a lot of it when you talk to people, it's coming from an online world, and it's spreading into like a social contagion to kids, right? But it came from somewhere, and it's coming from electronic devices, coming from social media,
Yeah.
it's coming from these different avenues, these ideas, and so people adapt to them. Same thing with post George Floyd, quite literally. And I say this as someone who viewed himself as a Democrat at one point. At one moment, we wanted a colorblind society, and then the next day, it's like black people have always been oppressed, and we should always look at the race. It's just like, what exactly is happening? And all of that was fueled by a media propaganda machine of a specific ideology coming from a specific kind of people. They tend to be upper class elitists, right? And that was their moment. The floodgates opened. They got to say all the stuff that they've been saying within colleges. When I was paying attention to that, right, the protesting on campuses,
Mm-hmm.
right, which was a reflection of propaganda that they were being fed as students, and now they get to come out into the world and they're being validated and they get to say all the things, and that's actually the mainstream now. So we're looking at, in my opinion, I think everyone is being propagandized. And maybe not all propaganda is bad, right? So obviously, I'm advocating for a nuclear family. I think that's good propaganda.
Yeah.
If we show more programs where there's a nuclear family and demonstrating a happy and healthy relationship, that's positive propaganda. So we're all being propagandized to some extent. We just have to discern whether it's real or whether it's exaggerated. And especially when it comes to stuff like masculinity, the pushback against the ultra feminist, men are bad, that kind of thing, is kind of the feminism, but for men, right? Uh, it's the same basis, basically, that something is wrong with them, and that's why you're not getting ahead. Ladies, something is wrong with the men. That's why you're not getting that CEO position that you want. Fellas, something's wrong with you. That's why all the women are taking up the corporate positions. Like, they're all saying the same thing. They're just changing the noun. And they're ultimately pointing at somebody else instead of looking at themselves. And it becomes this ideological force that is fueled by fake propaganda, in my opinion. It looks at the absolute worst and makes it the example. So if you look on the male side, I'm not saying this as someone who's never consumed this content. I've watched Manosphere content. I've consumed these guys, and not just like, oh, I've watched a couple episodes. Like I was a regular consumer. And the parts of it that is good are basically the things that you would tell your son.
Right.
Right? The parts of it bad are the things that are highly exaggerated, highly manipulative. They tell men to be avoidant, right? They legitimize infidelity. They do all these different things.
go into that. When you say
Yeah.
that, when you say guys are being told to be avoidant, what do you mean by that?
Avoidant when it comes to relationships, right? If she doesn't get on your program, drop her. That's avoidant behavior, right? And that's also thinking that you can dictate what somebody does. It's making from a guy's perspective, it's making women as objects who are there to satisfy you rather than a relationship that requires sacrifice because you love each other, right? Love includes sacrifice. Without sacrifice, there is no love. So they're telling men to just take them for what you want and drop them and move on if they don't stay on your program. Or that, well, men can cheat, but women can't, right? These things, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much so an avoidant look at the world when it comes to relationships. What they also do to validate that, here's why you shouldn't be in a monogamous relationship with women, is because they all cheat. You want to know how we know they cheat? Here's this article. Here's this footage of an OnlyFans girl saying all this crazy stuff. See, that's what women are like. So they build these panels of high risk women.
Yeah, this is like the whatever
Right.
podcast.
Yeah, they build these panels with high risk women who say all types of stuff, and they out verbalize the girls because they got their talking points and stuff like that, and it becomes, see, they're all whores, they're all on OnlyFans, and they show these skewed stats, and there's no backing up to what they're saying. So they're setting up an environment that says, young men, the reason why you're not succeeding is because of the women. That's why. The reason why you're sitting at home watching porn is because of the women. They just want, they want an Andrew Tate. They want a guy who makes millions of dollars. They don't want you. There's something wrong with the women. So, it actually, I feel really bad for the guys who fall for this because in many cases, they just need to improve on themselves. And I'm saying that as someone who would have fallen into that demographic. Low self-esteem, overweight, wasn't taking care of myself, depressed, dealing with suicidal ideation. I went through all of that stuff in my 20s and 30s. And to be the person I am today, where I'm happily married, my son is 19 now, and I'm demonstrating a monogamous relationship. Like all of these things, you can overcome all these obstacles. But what we find is that this propaganda set is profiting off of men who aren't succeeding in life and telling them that the reason why you're not succeeding is because of someone else. It's fostering a victim mentality.
This grappling with personal responsibility and this culture of victimhood being like social score points that you get to like take on. How can I find the way to be suffering as status? It's
Right.
suffering as status. Uh, your prior book, Black Victims to Black Victors, is that right?
Yeah.
Talk about that, because you were taking this head on, and this is 2021. It was the aftermath of George Floyd.
Right.
What was the thesis of that, and how do you think about what has happened and where we are now? Because it's been an incredible 5 years in terms of the public conversation and like the politics of Black America. Like that's all gone places that I don't think anyone saw coming.
Yeah.
So how do you like lay it out for me?
Well, how I first approached the book when I decided to write it was I was trying to answer the question, what's the biggest thing facing Black Americans, right? Because that was like the question of the moment. Was it racism? Was it police beating us down as they pull us over? Like, what was actually the real thing that's facing Black Americans that is negatively affecting us? And it was much of like basically this book, family separation. That was the number one thing. So the most important parts of the book were talking about the impact of single parenthood, how it affects kids, but in a more of a compact way and some storytelling. But I also was talking about, but here's what victim ideology looks like and what it does. So in many cases, I was speaking general, right? So you can take Black and swap it out with something else. But I'm talking about the trail from victimhood and how it leads people down a deep, dark, and resentful place. And I'm also highlighting the people who profit off of victimhood too, and specifically, for Black Americans, the very people, the Al Sharptons, all these civil rights attorneys that pop up who try to get a name. They find a dead Black body, and then next thing you know, they're attached to the family. They're involved in this lawsuit, for racial justice. It's all a facade. It's all nonsense. And on top of that, let's say these are legitimate cases, right? But what's happening to Tyrone has nothing to do with me, right? Just the same way George Floyd, if you buy everything about the narrative about George Floyd and how he died, well, that's unfortunate. The man shouldn't be dead. But that happened in Minnesota. I live in New Jersey. What does that have to do with me, right? This sounds like, at most, a Minnesota problem. And so why is every Black person around the country all of a sudden emotionally attached to one man that they do not know, would have never have met, and probably wouldn't have liked, based off of everything we know about his background? Like, why should I feel emotionally attached? And the simple reason is basically we've been convinced and conditioned to think that we are supposed to have an emotional reaction based off of someone's skin color. That's purely it. And so my thing is, okay, fine, that's the case. But we have to look at the details, right? Because more often than not, these guys are actual criminals. and they're involved in something. So here we are crying and being upset and side-eyeing the white people around us because a criminal was shot by a cop while he was pulling out a gun trying to shoot at another cop. Like, obviously he's doing criminal things and he died like a criminal. Like, these are, I'm not advocating for the death of criminals. I'm just saying, like, when you put yourself in certain predicaments, you cannot be surprised when this is the outcome. And too often, because, and I've said this before, the fact that we can say basically like 5 names, we can say Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, the fact that we can say those names tells us that
Michael
it's rare.
Brown.
Right, Michael Brown.
What was the first one?
Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin. That's the
Right.
one where Barack Obama said, like, that could be me.
Right.
That could be like my son, or I could,
Yeah.
on its face, sort of like an empathetic statement, but also like not true.
Right.
Like, what do you have to do with Trayvon? What does your life path have to do with Trayvon Martin? Like,
Absolutely nothing.
how much melanin's in your skin? That's what you're saying.
Right. Exactly. But my point is the fact that we can name these names. We all know the same names, and we regurgitate the same names.
The Saints.
Means that it's rare. Because if it's common, we would. That's like, tell us who's the diabetes survivor, or the person who died from diabetes, or the person who died from a heart attack. We like, unless you know someone, you wouldn't know. Why? Because we don't keep track of things that are common.
That's a good point. We've had Wilfred Riley on the show, who's written about this, and he's a social science god professor, and doesn't mince words about it. One thing that has very much changed, which is interesting about this conversation, because this is a common conversation, is that as we sit here now, we can have this conversation and it doesn't feel remotely as edgy as it did not that many years ago.
Yeah.
So what happened there? Like, from your perspective, because that's like, just to be in the political, this is all ends up being in our politics. You have, we're sitting here in Texas. As I understand it, it's like, I think somewhere north of 30% of Black men in Texas voted for Trump, which you go back in time. You go back to 2016 and say, in 2024, 30% of Black men in Texas are going to vote for Trump. No one would believe that.
Right.
And in 2020, it'd be like, oh no, there's no world in which that makes any sense. And yet here we are, where that whole cycle of everyone's putting black squares on their social media, DEI is going crazy, Walmart and JP Morgan are posting social justice warrior stuff. All their accounts have been taken over by basically like Harvard grads with blue hair. Like, I mean, like, the most extreme version of like a woke takeover of the culture takes place. And it all seems to go up in smoke.
Yeah.
Do you think it has, and why? Why exactly do you think that's happened?
So we'll use DEI as an example because I think that's a great example as far as it dying off.
Yeah.
I predicted, I like to say famously predicted on Fox Business that, yeah, this is going to inevitably die off. The reason why is because fast trends die quickly. And just like I was saying before, overnight, white supremacy, this, every black person is a victim. And not only that, we have to have this corporate environment where we need to be trained 24/7 about how to not be white supremacists, and that, being black is not just about skin color, it's a political ideology. And all this leftist framework was forced upon people fast. So it wasn't gradual. It didn't seep into the culture in a smooth manner. It was forced upon you, and you either swallowed it or you got beaten up for it.
It was very top down.
Right. Very much so top down. The reason why it was going to die off is, one, because it was fast, and two, because it was so fast, it wasn't appetizing, right? The reason they had to force it on you is because they knew you wouldn't like it. That's the only reason, right?
The real-time feedback on this is also striking to me, because it's obvious that when you divide, I mean, this is like the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. When you divide people, they are divided.
Right.
And the culture collapses almost immediately. Like, the resentments are immediate. Everyone is feeling worse.
Right.
Pretty much in real time. And yet there was a period of sustaining, I can't say that this sucks, and it's driving a wedge between me and my buddy who just happens to be black at work, and now suddenly I have to be like segregated or something, or what am I supposed to feel about myself? I don't even know. How about that? That's how I feel.
Right.
Was it really just the political moment that you think broke it? Was it the bullet across Trump's ear? Was it all the lies? Like, why did the fever break when it did from your perspective?
Well, if I was to continue with DEI in corporate America, the reason why DEI died off is ultimately because DEI makes no money. Actually, it does the opposite. It spends a ton of money. Corporations were spending more money in DEI than departments that made money, which, in a corporate environment, you're very skeptical of investing money in parts of the company that don't make money, right? I used to work in IT, and they would be like, yeah, we need this new thing, but, IT doesn't make money. So that would always be the justification. All right, we'll give you a little bit, but don't expect too much.
You're just a cost center.
Exactly. You hear stuff like that. DEI, it just went through money, whether they were paying employees to do diversity, which is like, well, what is that? Also, on top of that, every company wants to know what's the objective of every employee. So what's the objective of diversity? Like, how do you know that you succeeded? No one can tell you, right? So they always push it like, well, we just need more of this to reach this thing, this unicorn kind of diversity objective where people know just enough about whatever they're trying to train people. How do you know it's working? How do you measure this? What's the cost benefit analysis of all of this? And there is none. There's nothing tangible about it. In a corporate environment where everything is about what's the bottom line, how much money you're making, you're now pumping out a ton of money for a department that makes no money, that can't justify how you're spending it, and can't even prove that spending that money will yield some sort of beneficial results. But they can tell that people are more pissed off at work. That the environment is more tense.
Morale's going down.
And this feels like nonsense. So inevitably, it was going to come to an end. What I believe is that Trump winning wasn't the catalyst for it to end. It became the excuse. Because George Floyd was the excuse to put it in. But they needed something that was out. No corporation wants to say, I know we've invested, 3 years of saying DEI is the way forward, right? But we don't really believe in it because they know that they're going to get some backlash. But if they can say, well, listen, the Trump era and he's killing it in the federal government, so that's why we got to get rid of in our corporation, right? He becomes the excuse, right? Not that the board has been dying for this to go away because it just spends a ton of money. There's nothing there. And especially we're dealing with a downward economy. We need to let people go. We need to let this all go. So that became the catalyst where overnight it became a poisonous term of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Years and years ago, I worked on essentially like a branding exercise with Bob Woodson. He's a
Mm.
conservative. Maybe you're familiar with
Yeah.
Bob. He had an organization that would become known as, it was the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, CNE, and it was one rebranded, expand their mission, rebranded as the Woodson Center. And I was getting to know him, getting to know his staff, talking about things, talking about how he thinks about the world. And at one point, we were just talking about politics, and I asked him. I said, it is unusual to have the kind of the level of partisanship in Black America that we have. It's weird. It's weird to have one group of people on the basis with so many different cultures, because there's not one Black culture. That's ridiculous.
Right.
But there was basically one Black politics. It was like 95%. And it has, and that is weird. And his explanation for this, because I figured, like, this is a great guy to ask this. He's been in the trenches of this as basically like a right-wing civil rights activist. So he's seen this firsthand, these dynamics. And he said his explanation was twofold. Like, why has Black America been like so dominantly Democrat for so long?
Yeah.
With all the changes in what the parties even say they care about. He's like, one, the Civil Rights Act and era made the case through action that federal intervention can be good, because the Jim Crow laws were state laws. And so the federal government breaking up these vile state laws shows that, hey, sometimes the federal government's good.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing he said, which I was surprised to hear, and it just didn't occur to me, was he said there's something like 68% of Black employment's actually in the government. And so there's a kind of skin in the game to be on the team that grows the government, that's pro-government, that wants to see spending expand, etc. And yet, Trump and this moment we're in now is probably the biggest shift in Black politics since the 1960s. So how do you understand what's happening there with Black voters, that this is what's changing? Like, what's happening from your perspective? You're living in this, you're engaging on it.
Yeah. So I think these are two separate things. Why do Black Americans vote Democrat? That's essentially the first question.
Yep.
I take it into demographics, like where people live. So 60% of Black Americans live in 10 states, and you can name those states by the city centers, the urban areas. So Illinois, Chicago, New York City, Georgia, Atlanta. So you can pretty much
Philadelphia, PA.
Right, exactly. So you can pretty much iron out where they live at, because they live in or around urban city centers. So they're in very specific locations. Now, let's look at the general politics. In most of these places, they're not the majority population. Outside of like a Detroit, where Black Americans are the majority population, they're not the majority in many of these places. And so you see let's look at the politics within these cities. Let's say Atlanta, or actually New York City, since they're not the majority population. Well, what are the politics in New York City? Well, right now, and for many years, politics in New York City was rather left-leaning, absent of Black Americans.
For sure.
And so
it was really like a battle between which Democrat. There was no, I mean, you'd have occasional Rudy Giuliani's, but that's the exception that makes the rule.
Exactly. So that means that it's not just Democrats are winning, it's that there is no competition. They're competing against each other, which means there are no Republicans either. So you're dealing with tradition, right? My parents are Democrats, I vote Democrat, so on and so forth. So you're dealing with tradition, but you're also dealing with what's familiar. And a lot of people will choose the devil that they know than the devil they don't know. And on top of that, if you're someone who lives in these types of areas, when's the last time a Republican knocked on your door?
Right.
Do you know anything about Republicans? And so you're like, all right, I want to know something about Republicans. I turn on the TV and it's MSNBC, CNN, which is left-leaning and gives you a left-leaning filter of the right, which is, and I admit, this is something that why I was a Democrat, because I thought I was getting the truth. And I thought I was getting their perspective, but I'm getting a filter, right? And oh yes, that sounds good. But what they really mean is this, you're getting a lot of that fluff. So there's distance. No one local to me is trying to get my vote. and then I go and even try to understand what they're about, I'm getting they're all racist, they're all this, they're all that. So you never actually get to understand what is the Republican platform anyways. And then, of course, because there are crazies everywhere, there's one crazy that sticks out the most in that era. And they say, see, the craziest person who's a Republican, that's what they all think, right? This one crazy person says something racist. That's what they all think. Meanwhile, ignoring anyone who says something crazy and racist on the left. So it just becomes that people are unfamiliar with the Republican platform. And on top of that, no one is trying to win their vote where they actually live. So you can't, it's unreasonable to ask people, because most people vote all the way down when they go to the ballot.
Yeah.
President all the way down, one party. That's how most people vote. It's a weird proposition to say, hey, vote for Trump, but vote for Democrats all the way down. It's a weird proposition because they mean different things. So if you want to win more Black Americans, you actually need to win them locally. One, you have to win the propaganda war, which I think the right is doing more of because more people are listening to independent media than they are listening to the mainstream media, which has blew its relevancy. And so people are looking elsewhere. So they have to break through that. But then they also have to knock on the doors. They also have to reach out to them. They have to hear what you guys actually mean. You have to come into the neighborhoods, right? Now, I understand from a political standpoint, telling someone they have to spend $1 million in this area that they know that they're going to lose is not a good proposition. But that's because you've neglected it for decades, you know?
Right. It is, you're making a really powerful point about cities, because I feel like our politics tends to talk about red states and blue states, but that's not really what's going on. There's people live in cities. We don't really live in states. We live in the city we're in.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, generally speaking, densely populated cities end up being blue. They just do.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. I think there's some aspects of it is like when you're in a really dense city, whether it's New York City or Atlanta or Detroit, you're coming in contact with a lot of different kinds of people. There's social dynamics that I think sort of lend itself towards being more like liberal minded, let's say.
Yeah.
Just to survive, just to get along in such a diverse, crazy environment where you're not, it's just different. But the urban rural divide in this country feels far more important than has been talked about. And this does seem like a big example of that, where the urban rural divide is actually one of the things going on with Black America.
Very much so. And also something I want to emphasize. A lot of people don't realize, like New York City, okay, fine, Rudy Giuliani. But a lot of people don't realize a lot of these cities have not had a Republican mayor in anyone's lifetime that's alive.
Chicago being a classic.
Chicago, New Orleans, and a red state has not had a Republican mayor since the 1800s. Like, this is not uncommon. This isn't like a new neglect.
Yeah.
Right. This is a common neglect. So much so that people are saying the Republicans are going to try to aim for purple areas. That's essentially what their objective is. They've given up. They've abandoned cities. But yet, every 4 years, when the presidential election happens, they look at Pennsylvania and it's red, 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 and then they count Philadelphia and they lose, right? And it's like, at what point do you say, all right, maybe we got to waste that $1 million, but that $1 million will pay off after 3 election runs, right? You got to do something. And you can't just bet that the Democrats are going to fail, because guess what? A lot of people see it like, I'm being pragmatic. I only got one choice. I got Democrats. If I'm going to vote, it's going to be this. But there is also voter apathy. I don't think we talk enough about that. In places like New York City, it's high voter apathy. Places like Chicago, high voter apathy. They only get somewhere between like 25 and 30% voter turnout. So when Republicans talk about Chicago, oh, it's a Democrat stronghold, and it was like, you do realize that 25 to 30% actually go and vote. So the city is dictated by a minority of the voters that are there who are eligible to vote. Why? Because they're like, what's the point? What's the point? If I vote for someone who's a blue dog or vote for someone who's a commie, like, I don't know. It seems like we're getting the same result no matter what. What's the point?
Up until recently, it's like, well, you still had Michael Madigan running the whole state. I know. I think he's in prison now. Yeah, that was the Speaker of the House in Illinois. So you have something that I've been paying attention to, and you're part of this. There's this rising voice of young, Black, mostly men, especially on YouTube, who are more conservative, who are like it's a real movement. There are lots of conservative Black voices out there now in a way that was never visible in my lifetime, certainly not in the pre-internet era. Commanding giant audiences. So what is that? What has led that to happen now, do you think? Like, what caused you to change the way you think about the world from a political perspective and from an ideological perspective?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm always fascinated when people say that I'm conservative because I don't think I've ever said that I'm conservative. I think in many things I'm liberal, and I think in many things I'm conservative on. So that's why I always say, like, I'm a pretty moderate person. I'm politically independent. But you're absolutely right. There is a rising Black male conservative voice on the internet. I watch many of them. I think a lot of it has to do with the gatekeeping. I think 10, 15 years ago, they would have never shown up on CNN. They would have never shown up on Fox, right? They just wouldn't have been given a voice. And especially left-leaning outlets, they would have one conservative voice and 5 people yelling at them, right? That's basically been
that's been the stand. Scott Jennings on that CNN show is like a good model example. Like, he's there getting screamed at, basically. That's the whole show format.
Right.
Let's scream at Scott.
And so, like, those positions as someone who is conservative, on top of being also Black, is going to be far and few between. So now we have independent media, right? You just turn on your camera, you can go on YouTube. You're now part of the media. Now you can report on me. You can give your perspective, right? You don't have an overlord saying, well, sorry, you're not the type of person we want on here. And now I'm seeing Black conservative voices get invited onto Fox News, right? Because they're like, oh, this guy's built a platform. We want to have his voice on here. Maybe we can bring some people in the audience. So it's actually working the opposite way. Why are there so many Black conservative voices? Many of them, I think, line up with Trump, because Trump opened their eyes. And many of them have said this. Yeah. Some of them have always been, but for many of them, Trump opened up their eyes because they saw the things that he was talking about. And they also saw that he was advocating for things that they've been wanting advocated for. So to go back to what you were saying before, like, why are 30% of Black men in Texas voting for Trump all of a sudden? And it's because it had less to do with being Black and more to do with the class that they're in. And they saw someone saying, I'm going to tariff China. And they're like, good, because China's been stealing our jobs, right? We're going to stop Mexico from taking all our stuff, taking all our jobs, infiltrating our society, right? And return it back to the Americans. Whether he does it or not is a different story, but at least he's saying it.
Well, and in Texas, that case is pretty interesting because one of the things that I find so ridiculous about this past 5 years is this term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. I mean, it really should just be like not white, first of all, because it's literally just how can we make everything that's not white and put it into something? But there's no such thing as the BIPOC community. Like, that's not like a thing. That being said, you'll find, I think large sections of Texas, especially the closer it got to the border, also went for Trump.
Yeah,
who were majority Mexican immigrant populations, like multi-generationally so. But the notion that, well, what's really going on there is, say, like, Black folks don't like Mexicans or vice versa. It's like there's like a lot of, like, there's so much below the surface of this. In fact, in the immediate aftermath of the election, there was this clip on Joe Scarborough with Al Sharpton. I don't know if you saw this, where they were talking about, they were suddenly like, now we can talk about the fact that, like, actually all the BIPOCs don't like each other. So this is all ridiculous. It's like, well, first of all, that's both true and false, and it's all part of this collectivist nonsense talking about people in groups. But it was pointing to the fact that it was always like a ridiculous construction to treat everybody as one big blob of this is like the coalition of the oppressed.
Yeah.
I know I've thrown a lot at you just there, but
no,
I mean, when I think about Texas and the changing politics in the Trump era, like that immediately like comes to mind. There's just a lot of things that are like don't fit that mold.
Yeah, the BIPOC thing is exhaustive because it's so stupid. The reason why that stuff doesn't land, it's because that's not how regular people think, right? They just don't. If your neighbor is black and your other neighbor is white, like they have far more in common with each other, regardless of what skin color they're at, because they're from the same type of area. They're usually of the same economic class. They have the same type of concerns, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I've noticed, and when I wrote Black Victim, Black Victor, my goal was just to write a book and to be like, I wrote a book. It's for my son. That was essentially, but it led for me to get more, obviously more into the media and even writing for publications like the New York Post. The reason why is because I was like, the voice of the average American is not being heard. It is being surpassed by these upper class elitists like the Joe Scarboroughs, right? Like the Al Sharptons, who when he occasionally wants to pretend that he's a journalist when it suits him. It's being surpassed by these particular people. And how they talk about the rest of Americans and how we see the world is so absent of how people I know and the people I've come across throughout this country. Like, people don't talk like that, right? Only in their ridiculous bubble do people speak in this way. Only in their ridiculous bubble do they think Latinx sounds right.
Yeah. I've never met a single person that's Latino that says that ever.
Yeah.
My son went to a high school with 88% Mexican descent. Nobody said that. I mean, like, you would be laughed off the basketball court if you were saying that.
Exactly. But that's ultimately the point. So that's why I think that this is much more of a class divide rather than a racial divide. There is an upper class capturing of our media. And our media is supposed to represent our interests. They're supposed to talk about things that are concerning to us. And what I saw, especially, and I'm sure it's been happening before, but it just got turned up. During COVID, it became your concerns are based on white supremacy. I know you say you want to go to work, but just stay home. And you're like, well, I can't stay home in my job. The laptop class gets to stay home, and guess what? They can order DoorDash and Amazon.
Yeah.
Well, who delivers your packages? Who delivers your food? They don't think about that, right? What about the farmers who need to go and actually, create the type of food that can be processed and be sent to you? They don't think about that. Just lock down the state, right? They don't think about these repercussions because it doesn't affect them. And that's the type of mentality that I keep seeing over and over. And then they wonder, man, what happened? How did we lose and Trump win again? And it's because you've been gaslighting the American public for years by saying there is no issue at the border. You're all crazy. Well, then, thanks to the governor of Texas and Ron DeSantis in some cases, all right, you have them. And I think while that was detrimental, I think it was the best thing that happened to this country by sending people who are at the border, who are overwhelming places like El Paso, who don't have the resources to take in hundreds of thousands of people over and over and over. You want it? Have it. Here you go, New York City. You want your sanctuary laws to take care of it? See what happens, because this is what's been happening in places like Texas. And so
I can tell you firsthand that Governor Abbott is very proud of those flights and buses.
As he should be.
He's like, oh, I went to an event where he, it was like a big group thing, but the governor was there and he was touting that like he's like, President Trump told me that what I did there probably tipped the election in his favor.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people have to remember our mainstream media is essentially located in three places: New York, DC, LA. That's essentially it. So if you're anywhere else, they don't care about your perspective of what's going on. And it's very easy for them to just say it's not that big of a deal, or it's not happening at all. And they like to do that. It's not happening, but if it is happening, it's not that bad. Like they like to do that game too.
And in fact, if it is, there's the no, it's not happening. Yes, it's happening, but it's really just a small thing. Okay, it is happening, and it's not a small thing. It should be happening. In fact, it must be happening. In fact, it's mandated. It's like the men and women's sports.
Yeah.
This is a tiny thing. No. The move from this isn't happening at all to it's good and we should support it happens in like 6 weeks.
And that's the state of our media. The state of our media is constantly doing that over and over. And Governor Abbott's move to send it to these other places so people can see what it looks like, and they can react to it. Like, I think that was a good thing. He essentially sent them to media hubs, if you really think about it, because that became the issue. And I would go and I would watch news in different areas outside of where I live in New Jersey, especially New York City news, migrant issues, DC news, migrant issues. Like you would just see migrant issues all across the board.
Mayor Adams in I mean, I lived in Jersey and I worked in Manhattan for 12 years. And it is an interesting, it is funny. During that time, I was there from 99 basically until 2011. And, so for a lot of that time, we actually did have like Giuliani and then Bloomberg, who was like an independent mayor. But to see Mayor Adams speak so plainly about what was going on in New York City with regard to migration was kind of shocking, actually.
Yeah.
It's like saying like this city is going to be destroyed. And it was like, this can't be good for him politically in like deep blue New York. So it must be a big deal. To get him to say that, it's got to be like kind of a big deal.
A massive deal. Like managing human beings is the hardest thing. We're talking about parenting. Yeah. Right. Imagine having the government feed people, house them, and do it for months to years. Like that is an incredibly hard feat, especially from a distance. And so you have to find people who are going to do it. You have to find places for them to live. In a city where housing, I think Manhattan has the most expensive housing in the country.
Punishing.
So how does this all make sense? And then you have let's say the citizen that's living in New York, like, wait a minute, I'm working my ass off every day, yet these people who show up who aren't supposed to be here are getting free housing, free money, right? Because Adams was giving them the debit card at one point.
Yep.
Like they're getting all this stuff free. For what reason? Why am I working so hard and they're getting everything free? Does that sound like it's fair? And the thing is, it's not free because obviously my hard labor is funding them getting paid for. So I think it woke up a lot of people in places like New York City. But I will say this, the migrant situation for me as a New Jersey resident, New Jersey, for people who aren't familiar with New Jersey, we don't have massive cities. Like, Newark isn't a big city. Trenton is a place no one wants to go to, even migrants. So so we don't have massive cities. It's mostly rural and suburban, right?
The Garden State.
Exactly. So, but I realized New Jersey is highly affected by illegal immigration. I've lived in New Jersey for about 20 years or so. And I've seen how neighborhoods have transformed, like places like Elizabeth. Yeah. Elizabeth used to be lower middle class to middle class, kind of working class area. It was mostly Black and Hispanic. When I was in high school, it was Black and Hispanic. You go through there now, I don't see any Black people. There's no Black. It's hard to find. There are pockets of towns where it's just all Hispanic. That's it. It's all Hispanic, whether they're from Dominican Republic, Puerto Rican, El Salvador, wherever. It's just pockets of Hispanics who live in these particular areas, which on its face, I don't have a problem with it. But here's the other part. I know for a fact that much of this is fueled by illegal immigration. I used to work for a company that was associated with many of the warehouses throughout the state of New Jersey. That's another thing. As the transformation happened in these towns, also all these warehouses were popping up all over New Jersey. And it's not like, oh, it's just this one remote area. Down the street from where I live in a decent area, down the street, multiple warehouses. I know for a fact because I've been in some of those warehouses. It's all illegal labor. All of them. They all speak Spanish. They all need an interpretation, right? It's all legal labor. And I've seen how the operation works. You know, they get on, in many cases, they would get rides, right? Brought to the warehouses. They're seen as day workers, right? They're not employees. They do the same operation all the time. No one was ever worried about ICE. Ever worried about ICE. And then you find out that E-Verify, right? We thought, oh, just E-Verify, they'll stop this entire thing. Well, in many places, they have the choice to use E-Verify. Do you think they're going to choose to use E-Verify if they can get cheap labor and pay them minimum wage and just rotate through the next illegal immigrant who comes through or whatever? Of course not. So most clients don't use E-Verify. Like, this is the reality happening all throughout New Jersey. There's a place called Dover in New Jersey, and you're like traveling all the way up these highways to get it's pretty remote.
Yeah.
You know, it looks like Old Town USA, where you're like going through all these scenic routes. You get to Dover. Huge Hispanic population. You're like, where do all these Hispanic people come from? Like, and it's like that all over New Jersey. And so people understand I'm not exaggerating. New Jersey has the highest Hispanic population outside of a border state.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I guess it makes sense in a lot of ways in that New Jersey is sort of adjacent to two big city centers, Philly in the south and New York on the north. And so it's kind of the more affordable adjacent place to live to those two places, both of which are dense and expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, Philly's less expensive than New York.
We have high minimum wage. We were, especially when I was dealing with that employer, we were incrementally going up to, I think it was $16 an hour, right? Which is a lot more than if you were to go to Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania minimum wage is like $9, right? So New Jersey was the place to be, right? It's more affordable than New York. And there's a whole operation happening, warehouses everywhere. And it's not just like Amazon or anything like that. It's other fashion brands. Yeah. It's all these food companies, food processing. There are warehouses all over New Jersey, but everyone turns a blind eye. And then they tell us, well, Americans don't want to do those jobs, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. The reality is how they get these illegal laborers is they cater to it, right? It's a whole operation of catering to illegal labor. So they're not trying to cater to Americans whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a really, this is one of the things that has, it's so hard as an American, or as a person today. You go on to screens.
Yeah.
And you get this flood of news. And there can be such a giant disconnect between what you're reading and then like what you actually have any real physical experience looking at, seeing firsthand. Like what you're describing takes boots on the ground knowledge. I mean, to say, oh, yeah, no, there's that fact. There's a fact. There's a warehouse. This is happening all throughout my state, all throughout my region.
The entire state. I wish I was joking when I'm telling people.
Nobody's talking about that. I mean, people are talking about like the generic sense of illegal immigration's impact on working people. And like, I mean, it makes sense because how would Trump win on this, with this being the number one issue of concern, if there wasn't millions and millions of people who were feeling it firsthand in their own lives? Sure, you can get propagandized by the news, but at the end of the day, you still have like what you're seeing down the street, in playing into how you think about what's going on in the world, right or wrong.
Yeah, most people don't watch Fox News, right? So like at some point, I think
it's something like it's only like 20 to 30% of the population. This might have gone up in recent years since politics has basically infected everything. But I remember seeing some studies that were like only 20 to 30% of the population consumes political media.
Yeah,
that's probably still roughly true.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Outside of an election year, let's say, like right now.
Yeah. So they're not getting everything based off of what the TV tells them, right? They're reacting to what's going on. If your job is up and leaving because it's going to another country, that affects you, right? Or if your cousin lost his job because they're they're doing something else, or they started using illegal labor, right? They went to another state which is much more relaxed when it comes to using illegal labor, right? These are real things that are happening. And so when I'm talking about illegal labor, I've seen it all throughout the state, all the way from Trenton, all the way to places like Union City. Like it's rampant. And it's not just, I think what people have to understand is that illegal immigration isn't just, oh, well, Juan came across the border and he's just looking for an opportunity. It's like, it's an entire system. It's an entire system that's at play.
It's a supply chain.
It's a supply chain, right? And it's a supply chain also of human suffering as well. Starting from the people who are trying to cross the border, people being exploited, kidnapped, children and women being raped, sold into sex slavery, right? And then you have the people who make it across the border. And guess what? They say, oh, you made it here, but you need to actually pay us $10,000 more, or else we'll kill your family, right? This is the real life that a lot of these people are making through before they even get into a warehouse, before they make a food truck. They do all these different things. So you have that part of the system. Then you have the corporate side, right? So these warehouses, I'm telling you, this isn't mom and pop warehouse, right? This is corporations. And if I was to say the names, you would know who they are, right? Because these are massive corporations who are profiting off of illegal labor. They're profiting off of paying them all minimum wage. That's what they do. They pay them minimum wage, and they pay a third party because they don't want them as employees, right? So they're all contractors, right? So this is all technicalities. It's all systematic. Everyone makes money. The corporations make the most money they possibly can, right? They avoid employee tax. They avoid all these things, right? And they take advantage of it. And then you have, well, you think to yourself, how exactly, even if that's all true, how exactly do you take someone who just crossed the border and put him in a warehouse? Don't they have to show identification? Well, I think it's about 80% of illegals use fake identification. Like they use fake social security cards. Like fraud is rampant, right? Because why would they care? They're there illegally.
Well, how else are you going to get to, you need something, and you're here without legitimate documentation. So you're necessarily going to have illegitimate documentation.
Exactly. So and people have to understand, one crime begets another crime, and everything becomes plausible. And it's becoming a system that breaks down. So if that person says, well, I'm here illegally, so screw it, I'm going to get behind the car and drive, and I hit somebody, well, guess what? I'm going to take off, and you have to deal with it. Your insurance premiums go up.
Well, plus to that end, you can't get insured, because the second you have to engage an insurance company, which are high risk, highly regulated industries, you're going to need to show legit all the things. You can't get it. You can't get normal car insurance if you don't have a real legal driver's license.
Right. And so I've talked to people who have had that happen to them, where they got into a car accident with a legal immigrant. And even if the cops got them there, well, they're in this place where they're not going to deport them. The police aren't going to work with ICE. And so the guy just gets off scot-free, and the cops are like, good luck suing him. That's basically it. So you're the one who's left footing the bill and having your insurance premiums go up for what they did, because they can't go after him. He doesn't have insurance. Like, you just have an entire system that the only way it sustains itself is by law and order, right? If you break the law, you get some sort of punishment. And especially during the Biden years, what we saw was that laws are just suggestions if you're not from here, right? Now, for you and me, I can get a ticket, I can be arrested, all these things. But if you're not from here, the ultimate leniency, right? Even if they catch you in the act committing a violent crime, you'll get released back out into the streets.
Why do you think, I mean, it's such a hard time to keep track of the news because things are changing every week. But, one thing that has absolutely happened is that the notion that, well, there's nothing that the Biden administration can do unless Congress passes a new law. Like, it was instant that it was like, oh, no, that's not true. Like, in fact, it turns out we've run the natural experiment, and simply having an administration that's welcoming of illegal immigration versus not,
right,
accounts for like literally 95% of illegal border crossings. Like the second Trump comes in, just because people all have cell phones, global communication is instantaneous. So everyone that was on that migrant trail is like, all right, I'm not gonna cross the Darien Gap to get turned away the second I show up.
Right.
I'm not going. Why do you think the Democratic Party didn't like see this coming? Like it's weird. It's actually weird.
Well, I think we run into the same thing I was complaining about the media is the same thing as a problem with the Democratic Party. They've become elitists, not become. They've embraced being elitists. They brag about their elitism. They become unreliable and they're unrelatable. You know, someone like Kamala Harris, for example, she's the type of person where you have to say, like, the crowd wants you to be relatable. Okay, how do I be relatable? And she wants to go and study being relatable. Like, it's just what you are. It's just what you possess, right? And this is part of like the bigger issue when it comes to the Democratic Party, is that it is party first, is people second. You know, what do the people actually care about? Well, that's not happening. They just dismiss everything that's going on. And if you say, hey, we should care about our border, you know, like the Democrats did 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, there's all the footage of Hillary and Obama and everybody. I mean, if this was a kind of, which is even weirder in a certain sense in that Trump came in 2016 with this as the primary concern.
Mm-hmm.
And that almost instantly flipped it. Like, well, we can't be saying the same thing. So Hillary, who in 2008 sounded like Trump on immigration, well, suddenly couldn't sound like him anymore. Like, I wonder how much of it was like just being in reaction to Trump, that now we have to be the opposite of Trump just because we have to be, as opposed to being like, well, actually, we agree on this.
Yeah. Well,
like, why is that so hard? And I'm actually like relatively dovish on immigration in general. So, in that sense, I think I wish we actually just had a more sane legal path that wasn't so difficult for people who want to come here and be legitimate. And I think that's at least part of the problem, is that we do have kind of like almost prohibitionism, where it's so hard to get in legally that just like prohibition of alcohol gave rise to Al Capone, prohibition of a legal path gives rise to illegal.
I'm not sure if I agree with that. The reason why is because the United States has the highest immigration of any country throughout the world. So
yeah,
it's not like we're not letting people in. We let people in all the time. And I understand, even with that being said, that it's not easy, but nothing worthwhile is easy.
Fair enough.
What we saw was that the southern border became profitable, right? So it became profitable for the cartels, but also became profitable for big corporations. And so part of the reason why the Democrats are all for it, I was in disbelief when I learned that Joe Biden really did fly people into the country, because they were like, it's overwhelming the border. We'll just fly you in instead. How about that? I was like, that can't be true, right?
The cost of these programs is so astounding.
Yeah.
But you got to work real hard to get to 7% debt deficit to GDP in, years into an economic growth period. I mean,
right.
2024, the deficit was like 6.8% of GDP. It's never been that high absent a recession.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like, holy cow.
What we're discovering, especially with Elon being part of Doge and being allowed in there, what it woke me up to is that America's broke. Like, we don't want to say that, because we're the richest nation in the world, and we like to have this to brag about that. But America is broke. It is essentially the neighbor that you have with 2 Mercedes in the car and a massive house, and he has $1.5 million of debt, but he makes $150,000 a year. Like, brother, you're broke. I don't know how you're going to pull this one off. You're broke. So when the guy with Doge, who's with the Secretary, Treasury, when he's with Treasury, He's saying in our bank account, which I think it's hilarious that we have one bank account, by the way. My wife has
Keeps
more
it
bank
simple.
accounts than the U.S.
Keeps
federal
it
government.
simple, you know, your money in, money out.
Yeah. So within our bank account, I believe he said we have give or take $600 billion
In cash.
in cash. We are, I think the last time I saw, $36 trillion in debt. America's broke. We like to think that we're not, but we're on borrowed time. And so when these people are saying, well, I should keep my job and thinking that they're entitled to a forever position within the federal government, or that we can rescue the world through U.S. aid and take care of everyone. I'm like, well, what's going to happen with these people in these AIDS programs in Africa? It's like, when did that become our problem? That's in any other person's life. You give charity when you're capable of doing that. America's broke. I've sat on that position now officially. America is broke. Sorry, rest of the world, we can't help you. And by the way, why is USAID giving the BBC money?
I think the censorship industrial complex is largely the answer.
Right. So like we cannot afford to do that. And there was an interview that Donald Trump did in Chicago. I can't remember. He was like an editor for Bloomberg or something like that. I can't remember which publication. And he was trying to grill him and stuff like that. But that was the first time I heard Donald Trump speak very candidly about business. And I understood what he meant by everything he was talking about. Essentially, what Donald Trump was saying, that his first time in office, he saw that the federal government, one, doesn't negotiate anything. And so by not negotiating anything, which it has the leverage to, it doesn't actually value anything. Like it's someone else's money.
Right.
So if someone gave you $100, you're going to spend it frivolously. But if it was your $100, you're going to hold on to it. You're going to be very conservative with it. And businesses, good businesses, operate in that way where they say, hold on a second, we need to be very careful about how we spend our money. So when he's talking about negotiating the price for a new Air Force One, and he's like, how come no one negotiates the price? I think it was something like they offered him 10 million, ended up talking him down to like 5 million. Or I think it was 5 million. Yeah, it was like something like 5 million. And he's like, how come no one negotiates? And it's because no one values in it.
It is this fundamental skin in the game problem that is just part of why it's like part of why socialism doesn't work. Like everybody spends other people's money
right
inefficiently. Nobody washes rental cars. You know, that's like if you want a single line, why doesn't socialism work? Why have 40 countries tried communism and every one of them has failed? Because no one washes rental cars.
Right.
It's like if I don't own it, if I don't have skin in the game, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
Like you're just asking me to incur costs but you're not even asking me to incur them because I won't incur a cost. I can return the car dirty. You can pretend to pay me and I can pretend to work, which was this old like Soviet joke. They pretend to pay us and we pretend to work.
And yet there are people who are part of the federal government who are literally getting paid to do nothing.
Well, this is the funniest thing about the AstroTurf movement against Doge going on, the hashtag hands off. It's like, hands off what? Whose? It's like, so I don't like you hands off movement. How about hands off me? Like you want my money. You want we the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Like hands off you. You know, we started this conversation about the family and about selfishness and individualism. And I believe in the individual very fundamentally. But I think you're really onto something there. And I think that is one of the things, this entitlement mindset.
Yes.
Me. You know. How do we break out of that?
Well, from a parental standpoint, you center your children. My decision that I'm about to make, how does it benefit my child? Don't make up excuses, like be real. You have to be honest. How is my decision going to affect my child? And that's how you know it's a good decision, because it's going to positively affect them, then that's what you should do. If it's going to negatively affect them, well, maybe you should stay away from that. And it's not to say that every decision is easy. I understand. I'm a parent. There are sometimes you have to make choices that aren't, you're caught between two bad choices. Like, fully understand that. But I think if you center your child and the choices that you make based around how it's going to impact your children, you'll often lead to better results when it comes to your kids. And so that also means sacrificing your ego. That means doing things that maybe you didn't necessarily want to do, but it's for the benefit of your child.
I think one of the things, and long, people that have been watching the show for a while have probably noticed that the role of faith has played in
Yes.
a rising share of my concerns and conversations. We're not like a explicitly Christian show per se, but I'm Catholic and I've gotten more into being Catholic.
Mm.
And as I understand, I do think that the family conversation and the faith conversation are very deeply connected.
Yeah.
And there's some strong indications that there's a religious revival, or at least a kind of halting of the decline going on in America. How do you think about that and about that feedback loop that's taking place between the family and faith?
Well, I agree with you as someone who was baptized last year. So, like, I completely understand that. I know a lot of people who were questioning God and questioning like their faith during the pandemic. Sometimes during strife, it makes you reconsider the things that you knew, or at least the things that you believed. So there were a lot of people who are coming back to Christ or coming to Christ for the first time. But I do talk about my testimony coming to Christ within the book for a particular reason. I'm someone who I consume all different types of content. And one of the pieces of content I consume is people who giving their testimony coming to Christ. Every single one of them talks about coming from a broken family situation. Every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's always they either grew up dysfunctional home, or maybe there was abuse or something like that, or they come from divorce or single parent. It's some sort of family dysfunction. I have not seen a situation where they were exposed to Christianity and two-parent home and they fell out of it. Does it happen? Of course it does. But I found that very interesting that a lot of these people were like me. When I talked to my mother after getting baptized last year, she said, when you were very young, before we left Detroit, I would wear like these little kid suits and I would carry around the Bible and I would read scripture to people and tell them about Jesus. And she said that, you wanted to be a pastor when you grew up. And so I was like, well, what happened? Because I don't even remember that. And she didn't really know. She didn't know how to answer that. And I think that it was life happened. Like life makes you question if God is real because you're being tormented or you're experiencing some sort of torment. You're suffering. And why would God let you suffer?
It's the problem of evil. It's the
right.
most fundamentally difficult question for people of faith to answer.
Yeah. And so, especially for me, I thought that my Heavenly Father abandoned me like my father did. And so for many years, I think into my 20s, no, starting in my 20s into my 30s, I just accepted I was agnostic because I hated lying about being a Christian. So this is a relatively new thing for me as far as making it to a point where I said there is a God, and then saying I know which God it is, and feeling comfortable enough to be baptized in front of my family, and calling Jesus Christ my Savior.
I've a friend of mine, JP DeGans, runs an organization called Communio.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2023, I just brought this study up yesterday and was reviewing it because I remember him giving me a summary of it. What he found was in this nationwide study that what we see as a decline in religion in America is actually just a symptom of family breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually just said it, like when you said, like, I don't see people that were raised in a two-parent home that goes to church not going to church. And you're right. If you go to who goes to church, it's people from intact homes, and specifically where the father is there.
Yeah.
And he actually, in this very big study, basically drew a line that so went the family, so went the father, the presence of the father. There was just literally, by the time those kids are old enough to start making adult decisions is the lag time to the decline in participation in religious services.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like we might now be rounding the corner. And you're like a walking example of this. What was it that brought you back? Why did you come back to Christianity?
My path, so like many paths, it's not just like one thing, it's a multitude of things. So I had supernatural encounters.
Really?
Yes, I had one that was evil and one that was good. It's kind of, without getting like super detailed, the one that was evil happened. Um, I was living at home at the time. I think it was about 30 or something, like 31. I moved back home after a breakup, and I was like rediscovering myself and trying to do all this work. But it was one night I woke up and my TV was off. I normally sleep with it on, but it was off, and the lights were off. But it was dark, but it was like really dark, and I felt something, like a presence in the room, and I heard audibly in my ear, Adam, like it said my name audibly. And I said, "What the hell was that?" And I jumped, and I jumped up, and I turned on my light. There's nothing in the room, but I knew what I heard. Like I was awake. I wasn't in a dream state. I was looking around my room, and I heard something say my name in the most eerie way. I could still hear it. I didn't tell anybody that. Um, then what happened was I started dating this one woman who, come to find out, would say like she was clairvoyant, or to some sort of extent.
Yeah.
And because I overheard her like shouting to something like "Stop it," and I was like, "What happened?" So she finally like admitted that she's been hearing voices since she was a young girl, and it's of like the other side, and they try to talk to her and stuff. But after she said that to me, she said, "Before you go to bed, you need to pray because they know you're not a Christian and you're easier to attack." Now, I had never told her what happened, but she felt the need to tell me that. And I had already moved somewhere else at that point. I was renting a room somewhere. I felt uneasy at night. Like I felt like, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
That first night, after she said that, that first night I went home and I prayed before I went to sleep. The next day I woke up in peace. Like I was like, I slept well. And I did that for like 2 weeks. And I felt so much more at peace. Like I wasn't being like watched or something like that. And I was like, something's here. Right.
Yeah.
And then as far as what happened that was good, um, it stems from something that was negative that happened in my life. My my grand aunt was like my grandmother. My actual grandmother died when I was very young, but she meant a lot to me. And I found out she was coming out of hospice and she was going home, and they were like, she's gonna go any minute. So I drove all the way to Massachusetts. She was sedated all day, and then she finally woke up, and she was just screaming. She was just in pain. She was looking at me. She didn't know who I was. Like she was in so much pain. And she went back under, and I was like, I can't deal with this. Like, and I said, I'm going to go back home. The next morning, they tell me she died. So I obviously, like anything else, I was mourning it. My cousins asked me, will you be a pallbearer? So I said, okay. The day of her funeral, I drove up to Massachusetts. My cousin is a pastor, and he's doing everything, and I'm trying not to cry in front of everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm telling myself, as soon as this is over, I'm just going to go home. Like, I'm just going to mourn by myself, like, and just be all depressed. And we drive to the gravesite. I'm standing there, and I'm listening. He's giving a short speech, and then now it's time. And I'm like, oh, man, it's going to all come out now. And I walk over, I put my hand on the casket, and I immediately felt a sense of peace. And I knew that she was fine. Like it was just boom, all my tears that were building up, gone. And I said, what was that? And what I believe now and have an understanding is that was the Holy Spirit blessing me and giving me truth, because I was worried about her.
Yeah.
And he let me know that she was fine. It's still difficult talking about. So after that, that's when I knew, like, there's something. This is for sure something. I spent a couple years acknowledging God existed, but trying to figure out who God was and things like that. So, but those were having those experiences, especially for someone like myself. I'm very analytical and like, how do
Yeah.
you believe in something that you can't see and all that? Like I know what I felt like that was next level as far as something I wasn't even anticipating. I wasn't tricking myself. There was none of that. And yet that sense of peace was like the greatest of blessings.
It's funny because I can relate to that story so much, and one of the ways is actually my wife Lisa has had almost the exact same negative experience that you had, like waking up in a room, being alone in the dark, and hearing her. In fact, she wasn't, as I remember this correctly, she was younger. She was reading the Bible
Mm.
and had her name said in exactly the way you just whispered it, and stopped. And she's come to like look back on that and say that was like dark forces trying to keep me from reading the Bible,
Right.
trying to scare me away from this thing. And the world, I think that one of the things about our challenges now is we're told that we've got it all figured out.
Mm.
Like, oh no, you're just hallucinating, or no, this is all mumbo, this is all magic. It's like the world is so much more complicated
Yeah.
than we're told.
Well, that's why I think that, and later on, I would get into learning about near death experiences. And for me, as someone who's like, I try to be evidence based, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
all these things, I'm like, near death experiences, that's it. That's the key right there. And so, in a court of law, testimony is considered evidence, right? And so here we
Yeah.
have people giving testimony of dying. So you know that they've actually died. They were in the hospital, they died. They had this entire experience as they were dead. And so for some of these people, it's not like they were dead for 13 seconds. I've seen stories where they were dead for 15 minutes, an hour plus,
Yeah.
and come back into the body. Doctors can't explain what happened. But when you talk to them, they're like, oh, I was talking to Jesus Christ, right? There's actually a pastor who's based out in Texas. He's written books about this one particular book called Imagine the God of Light. And he uses near-death experiences as an actual reason why he got more into Christianity. And he's conducted thousands of interviews with people around the world. And essentially what it confirms is that whether they're familiar with Christianity or not, they all confirm the depiction that the Christian faith says. So whether they're from Africa and they're a Muslim,
Yeah.
when they die, they had a conversation with Jesus. It's like, why were they having a conversation with Jesus Christ, right? So it's different things like that, but especially the people who go to hell. So we often talk about the ones who go to heaven, but the people who go to hell, they're the most reluctant to talk about it because it's the most traumatic. But I learn a lot from the stories of people who go into hell because it actually demonstrates God's grace. For the people who are falling towards hell and being told, say his name, like it's not too late. Say it before it's too late. And saying Jesus Christ's name and watching in darkness a light come through and shine through like a pin and open up and being pulled out of the darkness and saved. And it just demonstrates to me God's grace. Like it is far beyond what we can conceive. So when I talk to people and I say it's not too late, I've since coming out as a Christian, I've talked to people who are like, I'm 70 years old, I'm still struggling. I'm like, it's not too late. It's never too late to come to Christ.
There's a great sort of prayer mantra that I was listening to on the Hallow app, and it was like, God, I believe, help my unbelief. And it's actually it's from a biblical character who approaches Christ and says he wants to believe, or he believes, but he actually also knows he partly doesn't believe, and that he's struggling with doubt. And so it derives from that, from an actual like sort of exchange with someone who's coming to Christ asking for healing or forgiveness, or I think it was healing.
Hmm.
Pardon my inarticulate exposition here. I just don't remember the exact details. That in so many ways, I feel like that's true for so much of our life. Like, I believe, but help my unbelief. Like, both things can be true at the same time. And we judge ourselves for the unbelief part. And so then we lean into, well, I have doubt, therefore, like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, and like the part that feels, that knows, doesn't matter because it's falsified by the doubt. And I maybe that's the choice we have to make, the choice of faith. Like, I'm going to choose to believe even though there's doubt, even though there's irrationality and mysticism and skepticism. And I'm certainly at a point for myself where it's like, no, I just choose, yes, I'm in.
Yeah.
I can still be skeptical. I can still want to probe it and understand it and ask hard questions. It sounds like you've had that same experience, you've crossed that chasm.
Yes. And actually what you're saying, the Gospels talk about this. I've thought about, like, Jesus chose certain men to follow him as he's walking around healing people and stuff like that. He could have chose sycophants. He didn't.
Yeah.
He chose people that weren't 100% sure. And even after watching him heal people, watching demons come out of people, healing the sick,
walking on water,
they still were like, I want to believe, but I'm not, like, this sounds unbelievable, right? So even in that sense, where Jesus Christ is performing all these miracles in front of people, there's still doubt. But the comforting thing is that he understands. He understands that there's doubt. And I'm not a biblical scholar, but I remember there's one part of the gospel where it talks about how they're all on a boat and there's a strong storm that's coming. And all the men are worried because they're like, it's getting stronger, it's getting crazier. And they finally wake up Jesus. And he's like, guys, he's essentially saying, you still worried? He puts his hand up and the storm calms. He's like, you still have not believed yet?
Right.
But he's being patient with them. He understands that it is difficult to believe, but there's something powerful about taking that step.
How has embracing faith changed, enriched the way you think about your role as a father? There's something really powerful. I mean, it's sort of baked into it. The language, the reality, the notion that, like, there is God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, like in a Christian, as a Christian.
Yeah.
It's like we have models here of the Father and the Son, and the notion that God is love, and that actually God's existence itself is that relationship. And that's something I've really only in this past year come to fully appreciate, is that's when, I went to 12 years of Catholic school. So you get, oh no, God is love. God is love.
Mm-hmm.
And these things are explained, but like the sense in which, in order for God to be love, it must fundamentally be in relationship. And that's why the Christian God is this weird tri-person thing. Because, well, how can you be love without multiple people? Love is an action. Love is a state of being between persons.
Right.
How has that shaped you as a father, and everything you've written about, and everything you care about for the family?
I think it gave me a much stronger base for understanding. So, talking about sacrifice, it makes me think of Jesus Christ. Him dying on the cross is the ultimate sign of love, right? He died for our sins. He didn't have to, theoretically, right? So that, to me, is a demonstration of love. And if you love someone, you'll sacrifice for them. If you love your children, you'll sacrifice for them. If you love your wife, your husband, you'll sacrifice for them. And in a selfish world, sacrifice seems harmful. Seems like, oh, why am I going to give up my advantage?
It's cost.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's some sort of cost, right? And in the Christian faith, what I understand is that everything is relational. And I started seeing the Bible in a sense that everything that they're talking about is essentially relationships. the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit murder. Why? Because committing murder is a violation of your relationship with your brother, right? We are brothers and sisters. So, well, Cain and Abel is an example of what happens when you murder your brother,
Yeah.
right? Why shouldn't you commit infidelity? Because it's a violation of your promises that you made, the violation of your relationship, your marriage. And so while I'm not the type of person who cheat on my wife or anything like that, it means even more to me that I was married in a church in front of God, made promises in front of God. I hold to a higher authority than myself to uphold a promise I made to my wife. That's a lot different than we got married in the church and I said I do. So it gave me a stronger foundation, and it gave me a father that I'm accountable for. And so I can make promises and be held accountable for it. I made promises as I was being baptized, which I've only told my wife what those promises were, but I've stuck to those promises. And God has helped me to not feel the urge to go towards those things that were holding me back in life. And I constantly think about my relationship with God. I pray more, right? And prayer is just developing a relationship, just like talking to your wife, you're developing a relationship. So just about everything that I come across, I think often people talk about rules and structure, but they don't say, well, why is that there, right? Is it do as God says because arbitrarily God wants you to do that? Well, or is the reason why is because it's to foster better relationships with people? And to go back to the near-death experiences, many of them talk about having a life review. And in their life reviews, and this is like a repeated thing, in their life reviews, they're not shown the job they had, the car they bought, the house they lived in.
No.
They're shown how they treated people, every single one. And it is emphasized when they treated someone good, it's not that they were able to see how they affected that person, but they also got to see how that person affected the next person and saw like a chain of 8 down the line, and how their good deed caused more good deeds down the line, but how they negatively treated someone caused more negative treatment down the line. And it's to demonstrate that we are all relational creatures, and that how our relationships are fostered are a sign of who we are as individuals. So it's not about how much money you make. It's not about your status. It's about how you treat people along the way.
I ask this question of every guest. The show's called Dad Saves America. And you're a perfect guest for this, with this conversation, covering the full gamut.
Yeah.
But because I do, and I know you agree with this, obviously, that this is the role we take on as men, probably more than any other, I think. That is heroic and that makes this impact. That starts with the family, out to the community, out to the society. That's the saving America piece of the puzzle. How do you think about your role in the American story?
I think I'm an example of a relative nobody who wanted to demonstrate to his child that if something wrong is happening in this world, that you are strong enough and you are brave enough to actually do it. And so for me, as a IT guy who was just living his life and having some sort of IT career, I didn't need to write a book. I didn't need to do any of this stuff, but I wanted to. And the more I did it, the more I saw how thankful people were, because they're like, you're given the opportunity to say the thing that I've been trying to have heard, right? People tell me they hear their voice in my words, and that means a lot. So I don't take any of that for granted because of it. So I think my place in this world is that I'm trying to encourage people to be better people. The first book is about the victim mentality, overcoming obstacles. I talk about the things that I suffered with, the things that I struggled overcoming, but I was able to do it, and to use me as an example. And here with this book, I'm showing that despite growing up without my father and not having a blueprint, I was still able to successfully raise my son to be a happy, healthy young man. And so we all have an opportunity to create our own story. We don't have to be dependent on, well, my parents were trash, so I'm going to be trash. You you can dictate your own story and as far as how you want to live it. But even more so, I think if more people trusted in God and leaned on them, they won't feel so isolated in attempting to do it. I think by having God and having prayer and leaning on giving people grace, I've become an even better person than I was before.
Amen. Adam Coleman, thanks for being on Dad Saves America. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio at last.
Yes, it's a pleasure of mine too.